Good writing in English is composing. The music of words is very, very important. This is something that was difficult for me as a native Hebrew speaker to understand at first. In Hebrew, I don't think the music matters that much. There's usually shorter words and they're arranged in different ways. It's a key to find references within the text that look like things in the Bible or in later texts. English is not like that. English is really an act of composing, of writing a text that is appealing to the ear. What we're going to do in this short lecture is review some methods of doing that consciously and trying to make your writing more musical and hence more beautiful in English. My name is Shai Dotan. I'm Associate Professor of International and Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and this series of lectures is designed to improve your English. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Most of my listeners probably recognize this text spoken by Mark Antony in Julius Caesar, the famous play by William Shakespeare. Now, I want to focus on the first three words in the text: friends, Romans, countrymen, and to ask you to try to reflect why the words appear in this order and why these words were chosen. Friends, Romans, countrymen. Notice a pattern that appears here: short word and then a longer word. The same patterns appears again and again and again in texts that are supposed to sound more musical and hence better for the ear of a reader. So, for example, in the Declaration of Independence of the United States, you refer to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or a longer word at the end of a sentence after two shorter: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I read about this rule first in the work of my mentor, Patrick Berry, who refers to it as the rule of three. By the way, I've seen others who refer to the rule of three as just a list of three items. Sometimes they even use those three items exactly the same, you just use them for emphasis. So you want this, this, and this. Netanyahu, for example, would say foreign companies would come to Israel because they want Israeli technology, and Israeli technology. Something that is a bit humorous. It's not a really good technique to write. Obviously, it doesn't belong in writing. If you are writing a list of three items, think, besides the aesthetic part of writing these three items, think about writing it in a way when the last item is a bit longer than the others. So I thought about this rule of three and many examples that Patrick Berry gives. And I thought maybe there are other examples that we can find, because this rule of three is not something that is derived of grammar or of punctuation. It is just something that sounds appealing to the ear across everybody that recognizes this English phrase. So I was on a quest to find similar instances that don't involve a rule of three. And look, for example, at what I found. In a famous speech of Churchill, he promises the British people, he says, I can only promise you blood and toils and tears and sweat. And you notice that when he says the word sweat, it's almost spitted out. So there's a strong emphasis on that. And I thought about another instance that I know, a very famous piece of writing that seems very similar to me. And that's the work of Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan, where he says, in the life of man, in the state of nature, in the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And again, a very, very punchy word at the end. So you see that there are other instances of this same pattern. It's not just a rule of three. It's many rules that you can look for. One other example that I can find is parallelism in writing. And the most famous example is maybe the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, who says it was the best of time, it was the worst of time. So a series of parallelism, one after the other. But notice, there's a bit of a trick here. After you have a series of parallelism that almost look the same, he ends with, it was a spring of hope, it was a winter of despair. So spring, hope, one syllable, winter, despair, two syllables. At the end, he made a change. And that's exactly what I want you to remember when you think about composing in the English language. It's very important to have variation. English doesn't like the staccato. So when you have short sentences, one after the other, they all look the same, they all sound the same. This is something that is annoying for the ear of the English speaker. That's one thing that I noticed when I was reading Emily Dickinson's poems. She wrote thousands of poems, I think of about 1,400. She almost published nothing in her lifetime, but she wrote many, many hundreds, more than 1,000 of poems. And at the point I tried to read all of them, and I noticed that she has a very, very interesting technique where she would have the most perfect rhyming possible, and then somewhere she would break a pattern. She would break a pattern in English. And that's exactly what I want you to do. Now, there are different techniques in which you can create patterns and you can break patterns. So don't rhyme in English unless you want to sound like Dr. Seuss. It doesn't make any sense to do that in regular language. But you can use something similar that is potentially still possible, even though it is sometimes a bit clunky when you don't use it properly. And that's alliteration. What does alliteration mean? Alliteration means that several parts of a word sound the same. So the same letter or the same sound appear in different parts of a word or of a phrase. So for example, I always give this example to my Danish students. I ask them, how do you say Donald Duck in Danish? The famous character Donald Duck is written in Danish Anes End, because end is duck in Danish. And instead of calling him Donald End, which doesn't sound nice, they invented a first name, Anes End, which sounds similar. It's a very common Danish name. So this is something that appears in names. Think about shows like Mad Men, for example, and you can use it in some measure. Don't overuse it because it sounds a bit childish or not respectable enough for most writing. But you can be aware of alliteration. The most important part, however, that I want you to think about when you're writing is cadence. Cadence is the rhythm of a language, and this comes from organizing your syllables in a way that is pleasing for the ear. The most famous use of cadence goes back to Shakespeare and many others that use what is called the iambic pentameter. So a series of syllables that are stressed and not stressed within a certain framework that is very, very technical. And there are modern authors that still do that, but it's something that I would never recommend anybody who wants to learn how to write in English to use. What I want you to do instead is I want you to try to listen to the rhythm that is created by the way you're writing. And always remember, you need to diversify. So this means, for example, that if you're going to have two short sentences, you can end the paragraph with a longer sentence. And if you're going to have a few longer sentences coming after another, you have to end the paragraph with a short sentence. By the way, short, punchy sentences at the ends of paragraphs are a very good idea. It's something that is called the bow tie. Patrick Berry referred to this technique, and I often use it as I write. I would try to take the end of a paragraph and make it into a short and punchy sentence that all directs the attention of the reader to a particular point. If you master this technique, you should be able to create a rhythm that is pleasing to your reader. And what is the best way to do that? Here, there's a very simple technique. Again, I don't recommend that you start to collect syllables, see if they're stressed or not stressed, use iambic pentameter or something like that. Maybe there are people that can do that. I never got any musical training, so I'm not able to do that. But you want to get to a point where you do it by instinct. And the best way to get there is by reading your text aloud. Simple as that. Reading your text aloud, and then if you write two long sentences one after the other, you will go out of breath. It will not sound good to you. If you write many short sentences one after the other, the staccato will annoy you. You are basically recreating the reader. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to remember that the best way to write in English is as music. You have to compose it. And the best way to compose music, unless you have very, very develop technical skills, which I don't have, is by hearing what you're saying. Now, maybe over time, your hearing will improve for particular things that sound better. If you have extra time and you're building your skills for the long term, try to read the work of great writers and try to, in a way, mimic the music that comes out of them. By the way, Shakespeare's plays are a good way to start, because then you can really see something that is very, very rhythmically consistent in a good way, that has been proven to be very effective on people, and then you can try to use that. So read out loud the text and get better. But if you have a text and your job is to make it better fast, read it out loud and try to make any changes that solve the problem. Some sentences are too long at the end of the paragraphs, can be broken out. Some sentences can be combined. Try to use your ear to compose the sentences, and my intuition is if you do it effectively, consciously, trying to use the language for composing, you will succeed and you will make your writing better and more appealing for the readers.